There's no business like show business.
Yes, let's go on with the show, shall we? Welcome to another episode of What's So Funny, the show that probes the minds, the brains, the psyches of the people who make the funny. Tonight, it's not Harry Connick, it's Harry Kondabolu. Harry Kondabolu. He's also in show business. Yes, Harry was headlining the Comedy Mix last week and was kind enough to sit down with me and let the conversation lead the way. Harry is a stand-up comic, you might have guessed. He's also a writer on Totally Biased with W. Kamau Bell. But we didn't talk about that. What did we talk about? You ask? Well, stick around and find out. Me and Harry yakking it up last week in his hotel room right here in Vancouver. Yeah, we're talking with Harry Kondabolu. How did I pronounce that?
You did it right, yeah. Harry Kondabolu. Thank you.
No, say it again.
Harry Kondabolu.
Kondabolu.
Yes.
So, always a stress. You know, if you want to make it in show business, I think you're going to have to change your name.
I've heard that, but after Zach Galifianakis made it, I'm like, maybe he gives us hope. I split a bill with Zach like in 2007. It was just very funny to see a bill that was like Galifianakis Kondabolu. Like the idea that...
It fit on the bill?
No. Okay. I wasn't actually on the bill. Like, I was on the bill, but like maybe it was a Zach's name, but it's an incredible thing. Like to see names that long on the same stage was really neat.
Yeah, if you had started out, I don't know, 30 years earlier, you would have been Harry Connick or something.
If it was 30,
Harry Connick without the junior.
I mean, 30 years ago, I definitely wouldn't be doing comedy. I think if my parallel,
that's true.
It would not have been a feasible thing because either. If I was like an Indian American at that time period, I would have probably been an immigrant, right? It probably would have been my parents, right? And I think comedy would have been a terrible idea. I still wonder if it's a terrible idea, to be honest with you, but I think back then it would have been...
Were there any... Surely you've looked at entertainers. Who was the first Indian entertainer in America?
I'm not really sure. I mean, there's been actors throughout the years who were like born in the U.S., guys like Ajay Naidu, and there have been Indian performers from India who've like done like bit parts here, and I've had decent careers. But I mean, it's not like now. I mean, now it's like this incredible time period where. You have figures like Aziz Ansari and Mindy Kaling, sure, but you also have like people playing bit parts that aren't like racist. Like they're just regular human beings playing, the person at the office or the person, who's a friend, and that person is just there, and their ethnicity is a secondary point. They're just regular human beings that could be played by anybody. Mm-hmm. So we're kind of in this peak period now. Hopefully it keeps growing, but. I mean, that's all I think ethnic minorities in the States at the bare minimum ask for. Like, just make this feel like real life. Like, have us in there because we're human beings that are in your neighborhoods and at your workplace. Just include us. And eventually, the hope is, like, they'll be compelling characters. Not just people who are parts of something.
Right, but racism is a real issue. So you're saying you couldn't play a part... that brings about racist ideas unless it's making a larger point.
Wait, can you say it again? I think I missed.
Yeah, I think I missed that too. I just thought of it as you were saying is that you just want to be regular characters that anybody could play.
Right.
But in your real life, you walk around and you experience, I assume, or you have racism.
Right. Sure. I mean, it's not like every day, and it's not like every minute of every day, but
sure.
But certainly, like, usually a few times a month, there's something that's a bit off, and it's not like the violent kind of racism that others have experienced or historically, people of color, experience. But was kind of you get like that bizarre comment and that bizarre, the microaggressions, like little things, like paper cuts that constantly keep like reminding you that like, oh yeah, this is standing in our way for some reason.
Right.
So it's that.
So what I guess I was thinking is that if you play a role that anybody could play.
Yes.
you're not going to be reflective of that experience.
Well, I mean, I think it also comes down to who is viewing it, right? You have a mainstream white American experience, so when they're viewing that, all the characters you see are kind of, I guess maybe it's true of all characters, but they're generalized characters. You don't get too much depth, right? Like if you watch The American Office, you don't really know everything there is to know about Stanley. You know that he was divorced, you know some basic things, you know some personality quirks, but you don't know what he's experienced on any deep level. Same thing with maybe all the characters, right? And so when you see this character, the idea that this character existing and speaking like the way Mindy Kaling spoke on that show and like interacting in normal ways and maybe sharing some aspects of culture but not like an extreme amount, like that's progress. To ask for another level of depth where this is a main character and where you see a bit of their pain and the complication of their experience and the fact that I think being any kind of minority group gives you a double lens. Like you're both like I'm both an American, but I also see things through the lens of race and culture and having to adjust to different settings as a result. That I think at this point is asking a lot of a person who is viewing this in a mainstream American context. I think that requires more education and change. But certainly, like the progress I've seen since I was like 6 or 7 is ridiculous. Like honestly, all we had was that cartoon. All we had was Apu, and now it's like human beings playing characters and getting to talk and I mean stand up too, like getting to say what we want to say and people are interested. Like this is new. You know?
Yeah, we were talking just before as I was setting up this expensive equipment. About Russell Peters.
Yeah.
And the first time you saw him.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the internet was good to Russell Peters. Jeez, because I remember, this is before YouTube, I guess some of his Comedy Now special was leaked on the internet. It was like cut into small pieces, like MOV files or something, or MPEGs, and posted on, I guess some grad students had done it, and all of a sudden, like, everyone was downloading it on Napster and, like, whatever else they could on people's websites just to see, like, these clips of his Comedy Now special. And it blew me away because, wow, it's like, I want to do comedy, and there are no big, like, South Asian comics, and here is one, but he's not in America, he's in Canada, and Canada is such a mysterious place, and they have their own comedy specials. There were so many
The stars are all Indian.
Right, like, how is this possible? And, I mean, him hosting, like, the Juno Awards, like hearing about that was like, what? This is before Aziz became this huge star and like is hosting award shows as well. But like, it's like this man is hosting a national thing and he's a big name and people know who he is and it's not weird that he's succeeding. And I mean, it's just a fascinating. It was just such a it's still a fascinating thing.
I wonder if it wasn't weird for me that he was succeeding. Or many Canadians who were fans of comedy because we'd seen him for the past 20 years in clubs. Yeah. Or conversely, if it was weird for other Indo-Canadians, if they had that same experience you had.
Right. I don't know. I mean, I'd imagine so. I mean, at the same time, I don't know how your history is with Indo-Canadians. Has there been a lot of entertainers before? Have there been a lot of stars and comedians or actors?
We don't have stars or comedians of any nationality.
Right. But I mean, also, I don't know how this works. Has there been a great deal more... Because, I mean, Indian Americans, South Asian Americans in general, in the U.S., to a lot of people is a new phenomenon. It's our exposure into the mainstream, whether it's like Sanjay Gupta or different people in different roles on television, that's fairly new. I mean, has this country had like a older relationship? Like, do you have ministers who are South Asian? Do you have...
Oh, sure, like political...
Yeah, and is that more long-standing?
I guess so. I didn't do my research to that level.
But I think that's probably a big part.
We had an Indo-Canadian premier here in British Columbia.
Oh, yeah, that's... The idea of governors who are South Asian is within the last few years. Like, this is... The idea of a greater South Asian presence is new, and I'm assuming in Canada it's a little bit older. It's less of a weird thing. Like, in the UK, like, when I saw the show called Goodness Gracious Me, which used to be on the BBC, this was like late 90s, like, it blew me away because it was like an in living color for the UK. And you had all these South Asian characters doing things that both reflected their experience as South Asian people, but also as Brits, and that blew me away. But also, they have a long-standing relationship with South Asians, or what they'd call Asians, there as a result of colonialism and immigration. That's a lot older. So, I mean, it makes more sense in that context. But in the U.S., people for a long time, the idea of the Indian immigrant, that wasn't something that people understood. When my father came to the U.S., I was going to say this country. When my father came to the U.S., he spent his first year in Louisiana, in a small town in Louisiana, and he was telling me that there was an old lady on her porch, and she got off the porch, stunned to see him, and asked him if he was Chinese. Like, she had never seen a person who wasn't white or black before, and it was
still to this day when I hear talk about the racial situation in the States, it's very split into black or white, and I go, living in Vancouver, we don't have a large black community,
sure,
but we see a lot of Asians, a lot of South Asians, and I just wonder, how do they feel in the States when it's either or, black or white?
I mean,
I know there's comics who come up here and go, oh, everybody's white.
Right.
Well, look around you. No, just because you don't see a lot of black people.
Right. I mean, that partly is because how the U.S. was forged, right? Like, when you have a history of slavery, and that's such a big part of it, and the civil rights movement, and kind of, that binary becomes very, very clear and ingrained. And, I grew up kind of with that black-white binary as well. Like, you're forming identity as a young person, and you would either be white or black. Like, what kind of music are you listening to? Are you listening to rap music, or are you listening to rock music? And that was split, at least growing up for me, along racial lines. You're being white, you're being black, and it was cooler to be black generally in New York, and that was kind of
across the board.
And so, that's so much of, U.S. culture is black culture, black American culture. So much of world culture is still very much influenced with black American culture. So, that binary, has been firm for quite some time, but, it's changing and chipping away as there's a greater Latino population, and as you see, that's another thing with multimedia, you see so many other faces now, being normalized, whether it's on the news, whether it's in art, whether it's in movies, music, comedy. It's becoming less clear. But it's hard when there's such a history of black-white, to think outside of it.
So you felt a certain kinship with the black culture. And were your favorite comics, Eddie Murphy and Richard Pryor?
I definitely feel a kinship with, people of color, comics of color, artists of color, because there are certain things they would talk about that were maybe a bit more relatable, like discrimination, for example, or racism, things like that. And I think Eddie Murphy I knew more as like an actor, and I discovered his stand-up a lot later. Okay. The first comic I saw that amazed me was Margaret Cho, just because it was an Asian person doing comedy, and that was just, it wasn't black, white, Latino, there was somebody else, and she was talking about her parents, and even we had very different experiences, there were certain things that at least I saw parallels in. Chris Rock, certainly, Dave Chappelle.
Yeah, I need to update my references. Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle.
That's more, yeah. But that's just right after that, that would have been the next in line, and I certainly, growing up, Mark Maron, and
what? Where did you see Mark Maron?
In New York City, growing up in Queens, because I used to see Maron a lot at the Comedy Cellar, because he was a regular at the Comedy Cellar, and so when I was 17, 18, whatever, we'd go on a Tuesday, me and my friends, and you'd have a free internet deal where you just had to buy 2 drinks. We'd have our 2 sodas and watch a show, and we'd see Colin Quinn and Maron and Todd Barry. It was like this incredible lineup of comics just working on new material for like $10.
And you weren't thinking of being a comic then?
Oh, absolutely not. You daydream. Every kid has their daydreams of whether they're a musician or whatever.
Yeah, my experience going to comedy when I was around that age too. You walk out and you see enough of it, and you start to think in their rhythms, and, and then you. I guess the next step, which I never took, is I should get up there and try that.
I had an interest certainly in what it would be like to be on stage, and I would daydream about it. And when I was in high school and I was 17, 18, I started a comedy night in high school, and And I thought that was it. Like, I thought like that was my one chance to do it. And most of the material wasn't really original, both in terms of I either like blatantly ripped off Chris Rock or Margaret Cho jokes and just changed it slightly so it fit me, or I wrote stuff that was so hacky. And maybe at the time it was a little less hacky, but like still fairly hacky. And, 17, 18, I think early on, comics, they very much speak in the voices of their heroes until they figure out what their actual voice is. Usually that seems to be the case. But yeah, I mean, and very much like I see myself doing it now still. Like when I yell out punchlines, it's very much Lewis Black. I mean, there's moments where I'm like, I write for a show in the States called Totally Biased with W. Kamau Bell, which is produced by Chris Rock, and Lewis Black was on and did an incredible interview on the show, and hearing him get laughs, I'm like, right, like only you could get away with that punchline. It's you, your delivery, your personality.
Delivery, yeah.
It's very much. It seems like because it's him, you know why that's funny. But if someone else was to do it, it's like, where is the
It'd be a raving lunatic.
Right. But we love him, so it's and so anyway, growing up in New York, I definitely got to see people live at an early age, and I think that gave me an advantage because a lot of comics, it was, we didn't have as much of the stuff on the internet as kids now do, but I got to see how live comedy worked and material got built, and it wasn't just a polished TV set where there are edits and applause breaks, and that joke normally wouldn't hit as hard in a club, but in that room that day it did, and it got recorded, and now it's online, and now it's great, right? Yeah. And that's not always the case, and you see how a joke fails, and you see how I saw him do that joke 3 months ago, now it's good, and why is it good now? And you'd have to figure it out. And certainly I got exposed to great things growing up in New York as a result. Yeah.
Sometimes you can't even figure it out, and it's just the energy in the room, because it works one night and the next night
and the delivery is the same, and you start and you try to figure it out. It's like maybe this because the segue was different, maybe because I had them rolling, so this was a good joke after that, but it couldn't live on its own momentum, and or maybe it's because something happened in the news, so that triggered some kind of response, or maybe they thought I was talking about something else. And I mean, it's funny seeing comics who, have been doing it forever, and they get off stage, and their reaction is the same. It's like, why didn't that work? Like, oh, that was a new one. It's like the same kind of stuff. Like, it doesn't change. It's still the same process of tweaking language and being dumbfounded by an audience. Like, why? Why did this not work tonight? Like, everyone else liked it. Why don't you like it? And
or the opposite, if you're Marin, who's going through that process before he goes.
Oh, right.
Yeah, what am I doing here? This isn't going to work. Well, I don't know what to say.
Right. I mean, he's so wonderful to watch. I mean, when I'd go to the Cellar, I mean, he was, to me, always the comic that stood out, just because it was... I think New York club comedy, there's a certain feeling, there's an aggression, there's a kind of a roughness to it, and I think especially New York, like for example, when discussing race and things like that, I think because there's so much diversity, but there's also lots of tension and frustration and lack of funds and all these other things, like there's a roughness when people talk about race and comedy clubs. You see that with Marin. I always saw somebody who was a lot more thoughtful, and he took a few more steps before he made a joke and didn't go after the easiest angles. He took the harder routes, and even as like a kid, I was kind of like, that, how do I get to that? And it took forever to get anywhere close to that, but that was something I always admired, like just how he wrote a piece.
No, he has thoughtful aggression.
Yes, very, very thoughtful aggression, and I think, and also, it's okay to be aggressive. And when do you be aggressive? And when do you pull back? And I mean, the thing that I hope to one day get to, one day master, is putting yourself out there, and how you put yourself out there and still have control. And that's one thing Marin does really well. Like he makes himself vulnerable, but he still has control of that vulnerability when he's sharing it with people. That's really hard to do. And I think
and how much do you want to share?
And how much do you want to share? And learning that, I mean, that comes from putting yourself out there, and it's changing too. I think it's harder to do it in some ways too, because with the internet and with people writing stuff, like, you take those. Comedy is about taking those risks, and it's about failing, and it's about that's why we get so frustrated when people record our sets. It's like, this wasn't ready to be recorded. That's why I'm doing it here. I got to figure it out. Like, yeah, what I said was off. I hope I don't say it again. And that's not every comment, but I certainly feel that. Like, there are things I say some nights I'm like, oh, that was awful. I didn't mean that, or I can't. How do I fix this? Well, the next night I'll fix this, and I'll be more thoughtful, and I'll try to make sure I hit the target the way I want it to hit the target. But that comes from making mistakes. That's the only way to do this.
People don't realize it's not a big presentation every time you get on stage. Here is the final result.
Yeah. I mean, even like, I was performing yesterday, and like, I did a lot of old stuff, but I threw some new stuff in there. I do that just because I have an audience to actually work it out, so I can see for myself, is this really something or not? Because now I actually have an audience, and sometimes the momentum of the act you actually are writing on stage, because you're so in it that when you get to the new stuff, one, you get more excited, but two, your brain's thinking comedically. It has been for like 20 minutes. You might be more likely to crack it, because it's like a code. Like, what words do I need to flip? Where are the punchlines? Where are the laugh points? Especially if you have a crowd you're connected to, where you're clicking, it's like chatting with friends, and you're more likely to say something funny with friends anywhere else, just because they know you, and there's less barriers there. Mm-hmm. So, but maybe that joke falls flat, but that's part of it. That's part of it, and that's part of what I think people don't understand when they watch TV comedy. Those are polished bits. That's a crowd that's encouraged to laugh. It's not like a club where you hope they laugh, and they hope to laugh, and they expect to laugh, but it's not going to be free. It's not guaranteed. They might hold back. And some crowds, you never know. They're just tight. You don't know what's happening in that room before you got out there, but it's tight. Mm-hmm. The Friday second show. Right? Like,
that's a little too loose.
They're tired, and they're drunk.
Yeah.
And... but I've also had Friday second shows that have been amazing, and I'm like, that doesn't follow the rule at all. You're supposed to be tired and drunk.
I didn't prepare. You're supposed to be tired.
You're supposed to be tired and drunk, and now I don't know how to, because you're attentive. I was preparing to fight, and I'm not fighting at all. This has been easy,
So you don't know what's going to happen tonight. We're recording this on a Friday.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention or get your thoughts on the diverse nature of stand-up now. We see more people of color doing it. And so, obviously, now you can be a little bit more discerning rather than sort of rah-rah, we're all in this together. Now you can look at somebody and go,
Right. I mean,
I get where you're coming from, but it needs work.
Oh, yeah, certainly. I mean, I think there was a long period of time where you didn't want to say anything negative about, let's say, other South Asian comics. And I generally choose not to, just because it's hard. Comedy's hard. Everyone's putting themselves out there and being vulnerable. And that's the funny thing when people come up to me and like, how can you stand this person? And I'm like, it's a nice person. I don't like his style, but, I have more in common with him in certain ways than I do with you as an audience member, because even though they're saying things I would never say and don't necessarily appreciate as a human being, like, they're putting themselves out there in a way that you cannot do and that we do. There is a very weird camaraderie that comics have, because we all share this bizarre need to make people who aren't our friends and family laugh in public places. That's a very strange thing. I'm still I'm critical, and I have my thoughts and feelings, but with comics I try at least to be somewhat a bit more like, you're figuring it out. It'll give you leeway. Certainly when Daniel Tosh said those things about the whole Tosh, the rape thing. I wasn't a huge fan of that. And there's part of me.
I understood it though.
I understood the how in a moment you say something, and out of frustration you say something. But I think what bothered me is, like, one, it was a horrific thing to say. This woman all of a sudden getting laughed at when someone says you should be raped is terrible, especially when women have to deal with that fear constantly. But also, there's a surprise of being criticized. And that's the thing that always weird. I get it. As a comedian, I get it. But it's one of those things where we want to be seen as art. We want people to appreciate us, because what we do is hard and we deserve it. And you should listen to what we have to say. And I hate the fact people are interrupting me because I'm trying to talk and I worked on this. And how come nobody writes about us and cares about us?
It's very needy.
It's very, why don't you care about us? And then when people actually criticize us or actually put time in to explain why they didn't like something we did, we get upset. Well, that's what it means to be somebody who's something that's seen as art, and that when you put yourself out there publicly, that means you're prone to criticism, and that in some weird ways respect. What you do matters. That's why we're criticizing you.
I will say though that criticism, obviously, as a comedy critic,
right.
I understand it, but when it becomes the mob mentality and just the broad strokes are mentioned. Like you said, he said she should be raped, which he didn't say, just for the record.
Right.
He said, wouldn't it be funny if she got raped right now? Now, it wouldn't be funny.
Right.
But the way I heard that is because they had this discussion about rape and whether it was okay to make jokes about it.
Right.
So they'd already gone back and forth on it. My interpretation of that is, wouldn't it be weird if she got raped right now? So what are the odds of this happening?
People laughing and clapping, though.
Right.
That's...
I'm just saying I got what he was trying to do or what he said, and it wasn't like, sick 'em, boys.
Right. No, certainly I don't think it was that.
So, but
I think it was a kind of a failure to understand her position.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Totally.
And I think
maybe an intentional failure.
Perhaps, and I think it was overly aggressive considering what was happening, but at the same time I get those moments of vulnerability regardless of how famous this person is. When you're in that moment, you say things that later you're like, I shouldn't have said that. Yeah. So I understood that. I mean, you can see, here's the thing, this is where it gets more complicated. It's like you can condemn that as a person and still understand that as somebody who gets the art form. And so that's kind of how I'm seeing it. Like, I understand how that moment of vulnerability happened. I can't understand how he said it because I wouldn't say it, but but at the same time, like, I've said other things. For my moral compass, I find, God damn it, really? You believe this, this, and this, and you manage to have that come out of your mouth. And sometimes I can apologize for it and try to make a joke on stage, and sometimes I can't because the opening isn't there. That's just what happens. Yeah. And so I understand that, and that's the thing. It's not a black or white thing, and that's the thing with art in general. Mm-hmm. And our art is a very special kind of art because it's being built on stage. And I think that's what makes comedy so exciting. Like, certainly we come in with some preparation, but it's also being built on stage. You don't know what's going to happen with a given night. Like, when in theater, if you break that fourth wall, it's wow, what cutting edge art. He's in the audience. This is incredible art. That's what we do every day. Every open mic comic can interact with an audience. You learn that pretty quick. That's one of the early things you get when you're trying to deal with like a live audience. And that's what's so engaging about it. So that's what makes maybe stand-up very dangerous for the performer and for the audience, but that's also what makes it exciting. And it's risky, and certainly I think stand-up reflects whatever dysfunctions a society has. So we can go after Daniel Tosh, which I think, I also made statements like why I disapproved of it and why I wouldn't.
Totally fair.
And, but at the same time, it's like... it reflects the weaknesses of society. We perhaps don't pay enough, not perhaps, definitely don't pay enough attention to sexual violence and how it manifests in media and art, and how we don't understand that we still blame victims and things like that. So we can go after this human who said a thing once recorded kind of on stage, or we can really discuss, well, how does this reflect how media covers sexual violence in general and how we don't really talk about it. And that's like the bigger thing. That's the bigger goal. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So not to say we shouldn't criticize that too.
But what I meant with the mob mentality is that people hear about it rather than giving it thought like you have and writing something.
Oh, it's the internet.
Yeah,
that's the internet. I mean, that's the strength and weakness of
so
the
then
internet.
He becomes this pariah or this evil person who doesn't deserve to have any success whatsoever. Rather than, hey, I disagree with what he said. Here's why I don't think he should have said it.
I mean, I think also Tosh also has
go get him.
He's an interesting figure also because he kind of has that show was a bit mean.
Yeah, his stand-up is a bit mean.
So I think that's part of he has this kind of track record of like, that's me. It's not how, there's a mean streak in there that, I'm not a huge fan of, and a lot of people aren't. So it's like, all this stuff, and then this is what seems like a direct hit, right? Like,
Yeah. Have you met him?
No, I have not.
So now you meet him one day, and
Might happen.
turns out to be a great guy.
See, that's the complicated thing. You're allowed to have both. Like, you're allowed to think someone's a great person and not appreciate their art.
Right.
That's okay. Like, I'm sure, like, there are tons of people. I'm sure that, like, I'm a reasonable person, and I think I'm thoughtful, and I can be funny off stage and engaging, and I think I'm nice enough. I'm sure they hate what I do. I'm sure they find it obnoxious. I'm sure anybody who heard this is like, oh, it's a comic going after Tosh. A comic? Really? Do you know what side you're on? I'm like, yeah, I'm a comic. I acknowledge the fact that, like, that I understand him in some level more than I understand audience members in a very specific kind of way. That doesn't mean I can be blind or deaf to it. I can still be critical of the art he has created or a misstep, and also admit my own flaws and know that I hope he's trying the way I'm trying. Like every human, I hope is trying to be better. This is a hard art form. Mm-hmm. This is a bizarre art form. We put ourselves out there without knowing what the variables are on a given night, and I don't know about other art forms if it's that direct. I think when you're playing a song, when you're doing a play, there's something that's a bit more guaranteed, and with stand-up, there's a lot more going on.
What about that, the Onion tweet,
right.
The Oscars? You got an opinion on that one?
Yeah, I think it was terrible, calling the Quenjane Wallace a 9-year-old to SeaWorld, and I understand the joke in it. It's not like I don't get it. Like, oh, it's mocking Hollywood culture. Even a 9-year-old girl would be mocked. That's the idea. Like, they're mocking people who would do that. But I don't think it was worth that. I don't think that the commentary was worth that. And I like the fact the Onion apologized. And I think the thing is, the Onion has such a reputation of being an incredible source of satire, being a legendary institution at this point in a very short period of time, being trusted and respected because they call shit out in very amazing ways, and being over the top but still being thoughtful. And I think in a weird way that tweet devalues them in a certain way. Like, you're going to put that tweet on par with some of the amazing things they do. It kind of tarnishes it. And so I understand the apology, because I think in a way they're saying we're better than that. Because they are better than that, the Onion.
They removed the tweet after an hour, apparently, and then apologized.
Yeah.
So, and now that girl probably never would have heard. There's that argument, right? But now there's this huge outcry, articles written, and now definitely I'm sure she's heard. Well, or her parents have.
Eventually she probably would have heard anyway, because it's the internet and nothing ever goes away, and she's a rising star, But, and I hear from comics that it's weak to apologize. And that's the thing. I feel like we talk about, and this happened with the Toshans, with a bunch of different incidents, like the restriction of freedom of speech. No one is restricting freedom of speech. This is not legal. This is all public discourse. And I think that comics sometimes act like children. It's innate. Look at what we do. We need the attention. I get it. But, like, you can have a right and be critical of that right. You can have that right and believe that you should be free, but you should know that rights come with duties and responsibilities. So they had the right to print that. They have the right to say anything, right? Basically, as long as no one gets harmed and it's not libelous, right? And there's a procedure for that. But, like, you have the right to say that, but is it worth the consequences? What does it do to improve the situation? That was one thing in Denmark when they printed those Muhammad cartoons in 2005, and they were crudely drawn. They weren't making an incredible point. It was almost just to test the freedom of speech, to test it. But it's like, this is kind of an oppressed group within Denmark. A lot of the folks are refugees. It's a complicated geopolitical situation. Like, was that worth it? Was that really worth it? How did it improve your society or improve discourse? That's kind of how I look at the freedom of speech. Like, it's an incredible thing to express yourself. Why would you waste it? I'm not saying them doing it was wrong from a legal standpoint, but, like, I just don't think it was worth that tweet.
Yeah, and did you read Matt Kirshen's little essay on it?
No. I know Matt. What did Matt say?
Oh, he was totally saying, siding with the Onion, saying they shouldn't have apologized, and saying everyone's done the joke where the nicest person in the room, you know, you're at a party, the nicest, sweetest person leaves the room, and then you turn to your friends and go, oh, what an asshole, or what a C word.
Is he saying that 4 million people randomly following 140 characters equal friends?
I don't know. You'll have to read it.
Because that, I think, is a big difference.
But he's saying the joke is that you would only make that joke to the sweetest, most innocent person around.
Jokes come in context.
Sure, and that's the context, isn't it? And that her parents could tell her, honey, they made that because you're such a wonderful person.
140 characters doesn't provide context, and I think when you talk to your friends, you're talking to your friends and they get it. When you're at a party or even on stage, you can provide a lot more. You don't always get that out of tweets, so which is part of the game of Twitter, right? And it's part of why outrageous things become big deals and stuff. But when you're the Onion and when you only have that much space and you don't have like an article or all the things that they do, like their headlines are other things, but even the articles underneath the headlines are hilarious, where they add more to it. So if they had written that as a headline and then underneath the actual weight that really lets you know, like, this is why Hollywood is so fickle and ridiculous, because this would be gossip and this would be said about this little girl. That's an incredible piece potentially, even though they risk that. When you're just saying that, you don't get that clarity. That's why the Onion's incredible. It isn't just the headlines; it's the weight of the stuff underneath. To me, the headline just is just his quick punchline.
And then yesterday or the day before, Joan Rivers got in trouble, but she's refusing to apologize for a joke she made about the Holocaust.
Right.
And I think,
what was the context of that? I kind of only, was that for Fashion Police?
Yeah, it was a fashion thing, and she made a reference, and so she was called out. And you know, good for her for not apologizing, because really, I always take apologies that are forced to be insincere.
Right. I mean, I don't think they can be forced. I mean, who was it Jason Alexander? He had said something. Was it homophobic or something? He said something that was kind of clumsy and homophobic, and he wrote a long apology.
Oh, yeah, that was very good.
But it was a thoughtful apology, and it was one where it wasn't something a PR person wrote.
Yes.
That's what we're looking for. I mean, if you don't apologize if you don't mean it. Like it's a waste.
Fair point.
It's a waste. But I don't think it's wrong to apologize if you actually get why what you said. Maybe because maybe at the end of the day, this fits her ethos, and it fits who she is, and she doesn't see the offense in it. She certainly shouldn't apologize then. Why? Because do you want a fake apology? It's not legal. It's not a stamp. If it's not meant, you can just hate her. How about you just hate her then? How about you just hate her? That's fine. But and if you want to get her off the air, do that. Do I think it's a bit of an overreaction? Perhaps, but she doesn't need to. The apology. What is that? Unless she means it, there's no point for her to do it. And that's the thing. I mean, it's about, if you're going to say something, and you believe in what you said and the intention of why you said it, then and if after you get hell for it and you rethink your logic and your logic still holds, why should you apologize? But if you think I was clumsy, probably shouldn't have said that, the context wasn't right, if it wasn't my best work, it's not worth it, I hurt people, I didn't mean to, apologize. Why is that something that's the worst thing in the world to say sorry if you really feel like you fucked up? People are allowed to fuck up, but people are allowed to apologize when they fuck up. I don't know. Some of this is basic first grade stuff. I don't get some of the complication. Like, I get it, like we're talking about really maybe more complicated things, but some of it is kind of straightforward. So
everything you learned in kindergarten.
Maybe.
Ari Kondabolu, proving himself to be an artist and a scholar, as you were billed, or not billed, but somebody wrote about that. And it's true, because going back a bit now, before your comedy career, or maybe concurrent to it, you got your master's at the London School of Economics?
Yeah, I had a master's in human rights. My background.
Oh, human rights. This is right up your alley then.
My background was, I was an immigrant rights organizer in Seattle, so comedy kind of just kind of happened. I did it at night. I got discovered in Seattle, which is very, it's incredible. That doesn't usually happen. You have to go to LA or New York or, even San Francisco, Chicago, Boston. You'll have a better shot. But I got discovered out there, and So comedy was one of those things where I had to figure out which way I wanted to go, this path I was planning to go on, or comedy. And I even after I got discovered by the HBO festival and was on Kimmel, I went to grad school anyway, and I hadn't decided what I wanted to do till after, and it was kind of like this door is open. I never thought it would be, and if I don't take it now, it would be, I would probably regret it. And also, you meet enough comics who work their lives for a shot, and I was doing it on the side, and I got the opportunities they've been working for. It felt almost disrespectful not to even see how far it could go. Like, I know some amazing comics in Seattle who have never gotten that close, and they are deserving. So I think,
the arts has an amazing pull, I've found, whether it's music, comedy, acting, because here you got your master's from a famous institution. I know Gallagher, he of the Smashing Watermelons fame, was a chemical engineer.
Was that right?
Yeah, and there's another comic, I can't remember, was a cancer researcher. So, you have all these things that you could be doing in the world, and yet you're drawn to the spotlight and making people laugh, which is also noble.
Yeah. It's a pretty straightforward thing. If you have that need, you'll come far and wide to meet that need, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's lots of lawyers, there's former doctors, and Ken Jeong, and a guy named Paul Sinha in the UK. It's an incredible feeling, and in some ways, it's the great equalizer, isn't it? Regardless of your background, where you started from, you go on stage and you're all up against the same kind of odds of, maybe not the same odds, but depending on what you do and what you want to say, but certainly there's that same kind of, how are we going to get laughs out of these random group of strangers? That's the game, right? And it's one of those things where if you do comedy, I think you become, just by the nature of it, a more well-rounded person, because you might be a liberal person and you have these politics, but your friend group might all be the same. You know what I mean? And in comedy, we meet so many different types of people who we work with and who we go to open mics with and who we go to shows with, who have a very wide range of experiences. And they're not university-educated people, necessarily, or they're not all, without money or with money. There's this range of people who share their experiences, and you hang out with them after the shows because the thing you have in common is this need and working on your craft. That's been a part of this art form in this industry that I've loved so much, is that I've met so many different people who love what
the performers you're talking about.
Oh, the performers. The audiences too, but the performers, yeah. Going any comedy scene, you meet so many different people.
That's true. When you think of going to see the theater, Shakespeare, or the opera, it's pretty high academic, I would imagine. Audience, and whereas in the comedy clubs, it's everything.
It's everything,
and same on stage. You're saying
exactly. Oh, and I was just thinking about going to a comedy scene, going to open mics and going to shows and meeting other comics, a wide range of people with a wide range of stories and a wide range of cultures and backgrounds and places they're from, and that's really exciting. And maybe if you had another kind of job that restricted you because you needed a certain level of education or whatever, you wouldn't meet that range of people. Mm-hmm. And in comedy, you meet everybody. You meet people who, this is all they wanted to be, and they dropped out of school to do this. And you meet people who are doctors and dropped out to do it. And you meet people who are, incredible comics and are headlining clubs, and people who are new and are open micers sharing the same space at the same time. That's a great, New York and LA, maybe it's a little different because there's more of a hierarchy, but in the smaller scene, the worst open micer and the best comic in town, they share the same space and hang out after the show. That's wonderful.
And also, it's funny how you were mentioning some guys in Seattle who were fantastic, just didn't get those breaks.
Yeah.
And you could see this all over the country, all over our country, where the difference in the levels between those who have made it and those who haven't is sometimes slight.
It's very...
Sometimes glaring.
And it's a variety of reasons why. Some it's just bad breaks, or family situation, or just didn't nail the auditions and the opportunities when they had them, or I think like a lot of artists, there's drug and alcohol abuse and mental health issues, and there's a bunch of complicated things that maybe prevent some folks from getting through. But it's not a lack of talent, you know. And I think also every scene in the country has a few figures that are kind of the local legends, the folks who are like, how did you never leave? But they're so ingrained in a place, and you know, we had that in Seattle too. And you have all these comics you see on TV or that tour that maybe are your heroes, but you also have the local heroes, the folks that you see on a day-to-day basis and push you because they're, you know, doing incredible things that you have a privilege of seeing locally. You know, we had a guy named Hennigan in Seattle.
That's it, Hennigan?
James Hennigan, but he went by his last name Hennigan, and you know, he would wrap up every open mic, and he'd go over people's sets on stage and kind of tease them, but he'd also improvise a bunch of other ideas based on just stuff that popped into his head or that he was riffing off of other things. And you know, he was kind of this guide to me of like, you can be that free on stage. You're allowed to be that free. Who's telling you have to write jokes A, B, C? Like, it has to be in a line. How come you can't just go with what's there in the moment? And, you know, starting out, that was an important thing to see, and it's obvious now. Mm-hmm. But it didn't feel obvious at the time. There's figures like that all over the country. I work with a guy named Dwayne Kennedy, who, Chicago comic. And Dwayne's a person who, you know, he's a few times he's gotten to a place where big things are about to happen. He's had a Comedy Central special. He's been on Letterman a few times. Been on Conan. He's been all over. He's had an incredible career, and you know, he's never gotten to maybe that top level because at a certain point he goes back to Chicago and he's like, I've had it for now, you know. And that's happened a bunch of times for the last 2 or 3 decades, where he's about to get something. He's like, I don't want it. And he goes back to Chicago. But
fear of success.
Maybe, I mean, he's, you know, I think he would admit that. And it's funny because the number of comics he's influenced because of his style and because of just such a smart writer. I mean, there's so many comics I know from Chicago who have cited him as an example. Like Kyle Kinane, Matt Bronger, Hannibal Buress, there's Kumail Nanjiani. There's all these comics that he was their dude when they were living in Chicago. He was the local comic who did incredible things and gave them an example of what you could do with the form. You know, use history and talk about race in an intelligent manner. And, you know, just he has almost every tool. And so, you know, that's another great thing about comedy. You have these figures that, influence a whole wave of people.
Yeah. That the average person will never even know about.
No, they wouldn't know.
I met you years ago, not that long ago, actually. I don't remember where, and only briefly, but it was in Seattle, and I always assumed you were a Seattle guy. I didn't realize you were in New York.
Yeah. I mean, that city, me and that city fell in love with each other. It was pretty great. Those 2.5 years I was there, it was very, and I go back often. I go back every other month. Less so now because of the TV show, but I used to go back pretty much every other month and just work on stuff. It's still a place where when I go back to Seattle, I'll book a small theater and charge $5 and do an hour of new material and see what happens. And if I can keep any of it, you know, that would be great. And it's still the city that inspires me the most. It's just a great place to develop, and it was a very high quality of life. And especially moving back to New York, I saw what I missed in Seattle, which was a sense of community, both from a comedy scene that was small and also having lots of friends and being a former organizer, having a great community there. So, I just absolutely am in love with that city.
So you go back now, is there resentment? Because you shot up pretty quickly.
No.
Didn't you?
Yeah, it was very quick. Within a year, I all of a sudden had all these breaks. Yeah, it was.
You were on Kimmel.
I was on Kimmel February of 2007. I moved to Seattle August of 2005. I started open micing in October of 2005. And yeah, it was quick, a year and some change.
So they're happy for your success.
Yeah, because it was an example that you can make it out of Seattle. And, I didn't really burn any bridges. I always rep Seattle. I talk about Seattle. Whenever I'm there, I try to give local acts spots to open and, bring
you always apologize when you put your foot in your mouth.
Right. Not always. No, that's the thing. I mean, you can't always. Sometimes you don't even realize you did till after the fact, you know? And also, there's that weird dynamic when you're talking to an audience and you feel like you fucked up. If you show weakness, they might pounce.
Oh, really?
Oh, I feel
all these things going through your head.
Oh, it's the worst. See, that's the thing, because some crowds, when it's my crowd, I could apologize or back and try to fix something, and they'll let me do it because they know me and they love me, and that's why they come to my show. If it's a random audience, if you leave that opening, sometimes it only takes a pause. You give them a 5-second pause, and somebody will yell something.
Yeah.
That's all it takes, like.
But that's
vultures.
with your audience, right? Because they love you so much. Do they want to shout out, we love you, Ari?
Stuff like that, but not like if I say something off, they'll necessarily interrupt because they figure I know what I'm doing, and even if they disagree. And my audience, I think, I have an audience that will write me page-long emails either of love or disappointment. Of how they'll analyze everything in my set and tell me why they liked each thing or what they found upsetting and they expected more. And
how do you react to that?
I don't. Either way, I put my love mail, my hate mail in the same fan mail folder. I just leave it there because.
But you read it and you have a reaction to yourself.
Yeah, I should probably stop reading it. I mean, that's at a certain point. I think you just can't. You can't make everybody happy on every single thing you say, and that's true in real life and it's true on stage, and you do the best you can, and I try to be as thoughtful as I can, and I really believe that the words we say have impact and we should respect that. But God, it's hard, and I can't expect that of anyone else. It's hard to expect that of myself to constantly analyze every single word, because to some degree you need the freedom to just go to a place that might be dark and scary and you don't know what's there, and maybe you turn something up that's hilarious, but sometimes you don't and you make a mistake. That's part of this. And I think sometimes fans of mine who come to the shows, they've seen me online but they've never actually stepped foot in a comedy club, or they don't like comedy, they like me, which is great to some degree because I have these unique fans, but it also means they're folks who don't know the culture of comedy. And when you see a clip online or on the internet, you're seeing something a bit more polished. Mm-hmm. And you're not seeing, fucking around and making mistakes and tweaking. You're not seeing that. That's part of this. That's a special part of this. It's you're seeing art being constructed while you're viewing it. It's you're watching a thing being built. It's different. It's not like other forms. In that way.
So I don't know how often you've played in Vancouver.
This is my first headlining weekend. I came up once for that show, a Sunday service that was at Hennessy. That was years ago. That was the only time I'd done a set, and it was a brief set. But this was the first proper show I've done, an hour.
So you played last night. Are you doing? Are you playing to your fans, your people, or are they just a club audience?
Last night it felt like a club audience. There was some
in a good way.
I mean, here's the thing. I feel like I do a lot of universities and colleges, and there's a different gear. When you're playing for a university or club audience, you tell your jokes, and you're prepared to explain a bit more because they're 18, 19, and they haven't experienced anything, so you have to be aware of that. But you're basically doing joke. When I'm playing to my audience, when it's my folks, it's basically the same thing. I can go joke, but I can explain less, and I could probably add more tags that I wouldn't normally do because they'll get it, and they get it on a deeper level. They already have taken 101, so you can go to the master's level. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. When you're playing a club audience and it's mixed, you might do what you do, but you also have to adjust. You have to respond if people call things out. You have to be prepared for checks and servers and all the stuff that happen in clubs that don't happen in other spaces, right? And I think I've been off my club game a bit because I'm either writing for a TV show or doing open spots in New York or doing university gigs. A club mentality is different. You have to play offense and defense. Mm-hmm. And I think with college crowd, with your crowd, your fan base, you're playing offense. You don't need to worry about someone interrupting or the stuff that happens in a club because why would you? If you do, you'll recover because everyone's on your side because that's why they're there. When you're in a place where people are just there, they're not necessarily there for you, and they're not used to what you do or they're not used to a comedy setting, then all of a sudden you got to play defense. I wasn't playing defense last night, or I wasn't playing it as well as I should have been. So there were certain things where I'm also figuring out what it's like to perform in the city. I'm also trying to figure out what jokes I can make about the city that are new and that haven't been made and that are funny. And so there's, especially Thursdays. Thursdays are the day you experiment, and the weekends you hoping to tighten. But Thursday I was experimenting, and some things missed completely, and some things were a bit off, and that's fine. But I felt like I wish I was a little quicker. I was a little quicker when I needed to be quicker. You know, that's how I felt last night. Like,
you're just being like any other comic after the set, going, "Oh, I should have done this."
Yeah, certainly.
Like, the people in the audience probably didn't notice.
Yeah, probably not. And they were fine. I mean, it felt like there were certainly folks who were laughing their asses off, and there were certain folks who were up and down, fickle. Each joke
like
start
any
over.
Show.
Like, you just got to start over. Well, some shows there's momentum. Like, each joke goes into the next joke, and you're like, "Oh, I got them. I'm on a roll." Last night there were no rolls. I'm like, "All right, prove it now. Again, prove it again. Next test." And it was also funny because there is something, an interesting phenomenon that I've certainly experienced. I'm sure other comics have too. When you have like 100 people in a room and only 10 people are laughing, and they're laughing their asses off, you know those 10 people will come back. Because, like, to laugh, I call it laughing upstream. You know, when everyone is pushing the other way and you're still laughing, that means they really love you. That's a genuine laugh. That's not other people influencing their laugh. That's them liking what you're saying. And then they come back with their friends. And the next thing you know, the next time I'm here, I have a crowd of people that gets it. And that makes it a lot easier, right? You know,
right, winning new fans over a couple at a time.
Yeah, and by by 2020, this might go a lot better.
You're playing the Comedy Mix on Burrard Street.
Great club. What a great setup. And I have Graham Clark hosting. Graham Clark! The legendary Graham Clark. I have like an incredible headlining comic who's hosting, and I think, is it Sean Emini?
Sean Emini, very funny.
Very funny. So it's it's a good lineup.
Yeah,
know?
And so this will air after you're gone, but yeah, for anybody who wants, you'll be back at Comedy Mix.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I definitely plan to come back to Vancouver. I mean, it's funny. Like, I go up the coast, and I'll do San Francisco, and I'll go to Portland, I'll go to Seattle. It seems ridiculous it's taken this long to get to Vancouver.
Yeah.
It's a great city.
We were talking before we started recording about the two scenes, because we were saying like Vancouver and Seattle, similar size, both a bit off the grid from showbiz.
Right.
But on occasion, somebody like you will make it to the next level.
Right.
Right. But great little scenes, and we don't really see much of Seattle comedy, and you guys down there don't see much of Vancouver except for the odd person. Like, how do you compare the two scenes?
I don't think I know Vancouver well enough, and also the Seattle scene's changed, but it seems like both of the scenes have really tight communities where people are actually invested in each other and the rooms that they create. It's not big enough where it's extremely cliquey. I'd imagine that there's cliques here just like there in any other place, but you kind of have to work a lot of different rooms because there aren't that many rooms, I'd imagine. And when we don't have the whole yucks business, like we don't have like a monopoly kind of thing where, if you do this, you can't do that. Like, I mean, there's that locally, of course. Like club owners say you can't do this or that, but not like an entity. So, when I hear about the idea of someone's a yucks comic, that's a new thing. I'm learning about what that means. Mm-hmm. I think, the comics, I mean, Graham Clark, I think, will do well anywhere. But, like, he's also, like, I think maybe a product of a supportive scene and one where he could, be smart and take risks. And he's such maybe it's not fair, but when I think Vancouver comedy, I think Graham. I think about somebody who's very innovative and sharp and has a wide range of influences and yet has his own voice. A very unique voice. Yeah. Very unique voice. And I love it. Like, he'll bring a random object on stage. Let's talk about it. I don't know what I'm going to say. Let's go. And he doesn't care because that's fun. I mean, I think he's an amazing comic. And, I think him when I think the scene. So if that's what the scene is like, I mean, that's...
Yep, that's it.
Yeah, it's Graham, But that spirit, I mean, just like, what's the harm of taking risks? Because in some ways, maybe it's similar with Vancouver, but who's really watching? You know what I mean? Like, you have people in the audience, fans, but who's really watching? Like, you can take these risks, and how's it going to harm you? And in LA or New York, there's always, you want to take risks and be innovative, but there's that little fear that I always have of, like, if this misses, am I going to be known as that person, that show that missed? And who's going to be in the audience? How many Central people here? Are there industry people here? Well, I was fucking around. I was trying to figure it out. And, like that kind of stress that you don't feel necessarily in Seattle or Vancouver. You just do it. Oh, I missed. Oh, well, tomorrow. And And there's so much good stage time. Maybe not the same amount you get in New York because there's so many more places to play, but I'd imagine the quality is better because you have more stage time. Just like you won't do 5 minutes, maybe you do 15 minutes, and there's a crowd that is paying attention.
In theory, yeah.
In theory.
There's a young comic in town, Dino Archie. He's headlining the Mix next weekend, actually. And he's from California. And he lives up here half the year. I don't know exactly, but he's here a lot. And people go, why? You're from L.A. Why are you up here?
What does he say?
Well, he was on my show last week, actually. He said that, you got to get up on stage a lot.
Yes.
And in January alone in Vancouver, he was up on stage 50 times.
Yeah.
And so he can improve, as you say, without being watched.
And also, again, like the idea of quality stage time where you have people that are paying attention. Like, I remember when I moved back to New York, and I moved back with management and TV credits, but I still couldn't get up because just like any other scene, you have to be seen, and people have to feel like you're worthy of stage time, even if it's 15 minutes in some random bar. And so I would struggle to get stage time in like 2009, just trying to get up when I moved back to New York. And so I would go to San Francisco and to Seattle, where I had friends and where I could get up any night and do 2 or 3 sets, each about 10 or 15 minutes. And I would write material out there and then come back to New York with the new stuff, with the stuff I brought from Seattle and San Francisco. And I needed that time to develop because I just couldn't do it in New York, either because of a lack of quality stage time or low stress stage time that was good. When you have a good show, you also worry about who's going to be there at this good show. Mm-hmm. It's packed. It's 200 people. It's a cool alt show. It's at the UCB Theater. But who else is there? Can I just screw around? And I got to deal with people thinking about stuff? And you do that equivalent out here. No one's really. Why don't you just have fun?
That's right.
Yeah.
You walk a fine line in your act because I guess comedians of various ethnicities, they have 2 ways they can go. They can talk about that almost to the exclusion of any other topic.
Yeah.
Or they can ignore that.
Right.
Thinking of Arj Barker, doesn't mention it at all. But you, obviously, you're a guy who represented recent immigrants, and you're very political, and you think about these things. So it's present in your act, but also, like you say, you want roles where you're just a regular person. You're also just up on stage, just a regular stand-up comedy. How do you approach it?
I mean, I don't think those are the only 2 choices, but those are the 2 extremes,
okay.
Right?
So
there's definitely, because I feel like I'm that range in between those 2 things, mm-hmm. Right? Because I certainly...
yeah, that's what I was getting at.
Right.
You encompass both.
Yeah, I feel like, because there's a way to talk about family and ethnicity and culture and race that's critical and interesting, but acknowledges it, right? And doesn't there's that thing where I won't make fun of my parents and use accents, even though my folks have accents, because I
Come on, do it.
Right, because it's one of those things where its context is important, because if I do that accent and there's not that many South Asians in the audience, basically people are laughing at my parents, behind their back in a weird way.
Don't they sound silly?
Right. Even though they're not there and they're not actually laughing at my parents because they're not actually there, they still kind of are. And by proxy, through me, they're making fun of my folks. So that's how I see it. And I know that my parents have thick accents, and sometimes it's hard to understand what they're saying. And it must suck for them to have to deal with that frustration on a day-to-day. It's not worth it for me. If I'm in front of like an audience of mostly South Asians, it's a cultural kind of thing. It's different when I'll do that there, because it's like, it's a relatable experience. It's a shared context. But outside of, when we're not amongst family, family quote unquote, like, why is it worth it? And I remember when I started, I certainly did those accents, and I certainly was that kind of comic, like when I was 17, 18, 19, and I started to make a change when I started becoming an adult, and I started thinking about things in a more critical way, and seeing different comics and how they approached race, and my own values changed. And so that act didn't really match who I was anymore, so why was I doing it? Mm-hmm. And so, I think there is a process, and I think it's true with all comics. Early on, your only goal is to make people laugh, and you don't necessarily think of what it is that you're saying. You just want to make them laugh because it's the best sound in the world, and it's so hard to do. And when you do it, why would you stop? And why would you choose not to do it, if you can? And it gets to a point where, I remember when I started adjusting my material and writing more politically and writing about things that I was actually passionate about, I certainly lost laughs as a result and started to embrace new laughs. And after a while, I adjusted into a style where I had these ideas, these politicized ideas, these ideas about race. Initially, they were very ranty. There weren't enough jokes in them because I was trying to figure out how to make that funny. And after a while, I started meshing. Well, I'm a good joke writer. I like absurdism. I like to do this, and this. And I found a way to kind of meld them together. But it takes a process to do that. Yeah. And so I do sympathize with, you're a young comic and this thing works. And you
got an angle.
You got an angle, and you're making it work. At a certain point, for me, I had to think about what it was I was doing as a producer of ideas. Like, what was I really putting out there? And it wasn't fulfilling, And luckily, I made that switch in university. I was performing at school, so it wasn't like I was, doing it at clubs and, there was that added pressure.
You weren't painting yourself in a corner.
No. I could do whatever, by the time I switched, I was already out of that context.
Yes, I interviewed Russell Peters a few times over the years. And one time he told me that he thought his next tour would be the last one, or maybe it was that tour, would be the last one where he does the racial material. Mm. And then I interviewed him years later and said, so how'd that come along? He goes, I can't leave it.
It's hard.
Because once you become known for something, to suddenly change, you risk losing everything.
The expectations are, his expectations are very different, I think, because he's such a big comic, and also his audience is a very global audience.
Yes.
It's very much like, looking at specials and stuff. I've never been to a live show, but lots of Asians, South Asians, he's become a very big community figure, and he represents and speaks to a lot of people. They get what he's doing, or they like what he's doing, and even going to Dubai, because I had a short film that aired at the film festival in Dubai, and there was a comedy show there. Russell Peters was the big comic. He was the one everyone wanted to see, and if he was there, that was the show to go to. So he's so much bigger, and it's funny because I think in America he's somewhat of a fringe figure because he's not a mainstream comic. And the comedy world, everyone certainly knows who he is, but he's not like a huge star outside of maybe Asian and South Asian circles. But he's one of the dominant comics, globally. He's a very unique figure. He's a fascinating figure. So sometimes, I think I get asked about how I feel about him, or people want an answer and want me to criticize him because our styles are so different, and I feel a certain way politically. But I think Russell kind of is. It's so complicated. He's not speaking to a mainstream American audience. He's built something from scratch. It's hard to. I don't know. I can't just say I disapprove of what he's. It's more complicated than that.
Yeah.
So.
And he is a funny guy.
Oh yeah.
So then it becomes to whether you appreciate what he's talking about.
It's not my style, and right. I think people, he's not an influence of mine. Certainly somebody I've admired, and like I mentioned earlier, when I saw him, do that Comedy Now special, like in clips, when it leaked online and people in America had really seen it for the first time, it blew my mind, and it's certainly an inspiration. Like, this is possible. And it seems ridiculous now to think about it that way. But, again, we weren't allowed to talk. That was a weird thing. South Asians were not allowed to talk and have people hear their voices and for that to be broadcast. He was somebody who was speaking in his words to a mixed audience, and it was broadcast on television. That is a new phenomenon in the States. Mm. So to watch a human do that, when I was 18, 19, to see that for the first time, or 20, whatever it was, when it leaked online, it was a revelation. Same thing I felt, when I saw Goodness Gracious Me, that BBC show, all, South Asians speaking, in a way that, making their own choices and creating this art and putting things out there that might not be for everybody. There's something to admire in that. So, it's not my style. It's not something I feel comfortable doing. It's not what I do, but it doesn't need to be.
Yeah, I'm sure you appreciate lots of comics of different styles.
Oh, yeah. And there are comics who, that's a complicated thing. There might be comics whose content I don't like, but I find them to be brilliant joke writers.
Yeah.
And I think for people who aren't comedy fans
It's a
of comics, it's complicated because you're like, that's fucked up. What a joke, though. Look at how he structured that. Look at how he built that thing. And it's a rape joke, but a well-built rape joke. I hate the fact it is what it is, but I can look at it as a piece of machinery and appreciate the machinery because I make machinery too.
Right.
That's a hard thing for, I think, people who aren't comedy fans to understand. Like, you can still, we have an ear to things that non-comedy fans and non-comics, like, you just don't have. We have an ear for it. Like, you can imagine how he built that. You could imagine the steps it took to get there, the tinkering. That's, I love comedy.
Yeah.
I actually love comedy. I don't like just particular people. I like the form. I like the types of ways people can be made to laugh. I like tinkering with language. I like the process. That's part of this for me.
All right, that's a good place to end it. I had more. We could talk.
This was a lovely conversation, guy. And if I make it back to Vancouver, which I hope I do, I'd love to do this again.
Please,
it was
please
a very
do.
nice conversation.
If you're ever here on a Sunday night, you can do it live, or I'll get the other equipment working.
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right, thanks a lot.
For sure.
A lovely conversation indeed with Hari Kondabolu. Thanks, Hari. And I'm going to hold you to that next time you're in town. You're doing the show. Hey, apologize off the top. There was some snafus there. I'm sure you caught those because they were glaring. If you're listening to this on podcast, you don't know what I'm talking about because I've smoothed it all out. In the future, it's seamless. You won't be able to tell. All right. Thanks for listening. We'll be back here again next Sunday night.